The noon sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered wooden church of Dry Creek, its heat shimmering off the dusty main street like water that would never come. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of beeswax candles and wilting wildflowers, mixed with the uncomfortable musk of bodies pressed too close in their Sunday finest. Evelyn Carter stood alone at the altar, her mother's wedding dress hanging loose on her trembling frame. The bouquet of prairie roses and sage in her hands quivered like a living thing, petals already browning at the edges from the heat. Behind her, the empty space where Thomas Beaumont should have stood seemed to grow larger with each tick of the grandfather clock mounted on the wall. 12:43. The whispers started soft, like the first drops of rain before a storm. They began in the back pews and rolled forward, gathering force and malice with each row they passed. Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through clearest of all. Well, what did she expect, throwing herself at a Beaumont boy? Evelyn's spine stiffened, but she didn't turn. She'd learned young that showing weakness in Dry Creek was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. The telegram crumpled in Reverend Morrison's hand told the whole story in 11 words. Business in San Francisco. Cannot proceed. My apologies. T. Beaumont. The Reverend cleared his throat, Adam's apple bobbing above his collar like a turkey's waddle. Perhaps we should, that is to say, Miss Carter, would you like to? She'd like to disappear through the floorboards is what she'd like. Came another voice, followed by a titter of nervous laughter. The church door creaked open, cutting through the whispers like a knife through butter. Boot heels struck the wooden floor in a steady rhythm, not the hurried step of a latecomer, but the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. Jack Monroe had been in Dry Creek for exactly 3 days, long enough to pin the sheriff's star to his vest and not much else. He was tall in the way that made door frames nervous, with hands scarred from rope burns and a face that had seen too much sun and not enough smiling. The dust of the trail still clung to his duster, and his hat threw shadows across eyes the color of winter sky. He walked straight down the center aisle, ignoring the shocked gasps and hurried whispers that followed in his wake. Mrs. Abernathy clutched her pearls. Mr. Donovan's hand moved instinctively to where his gun would be if he'd worn it to church. Jack stopped at the altar, his gaze taking in the scene with the practiced efficiency of a man used to reading trouble. The abandoned groom spot, the crumpled telegram, the bride standing alone with her chin up and her knuckles white around dead flowers. Miss Carter, he said, his voice low enough that only she and the Reverend could hear. Seems you're in need of an escort out of here. Evelyn's eyes met his for the first time. They were green as bottle glass, bright with unshed tears she wouldn't let fall. I can walk myself out. Sheriff, I don't need anyone's pity. Didn't offer pity, Jack replied. Steady as bedrock. Offered an escort. There's a difference. Behind them, Clayton Beaumont's laugh rang out from the family pew, the younger brother finding humor where others found scandal. Let her stand there. Maybe she'll finally understand what no means. Jack turned his head just enough to pin Clayton with a look that could freeze whiskey. Church is no place for cruelty. Boy, your mother teach you that. Or were you raised by wolves? The church fell silent except for the creak of wood and the whistle of wind through poorly sealed windows. Jack turned back to Evelyn, and this time he offered his arm. Walk with me, he said. And it wasn't a question, but wasn't quite an order either. It was something in between, an opportunity, maybe, or a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in public shame. Evelyn looked at the arm, then at the congregation watching with eager eyes, waiting to feast on her humiliation. She thought of her father, dead these 3 years, who taught her to ride and shoot and stand tall no matter what. She thought of Thomas's promises, whispered in the dark behind the general store, sweet as molasses and just as sticky. She took Jack's arm. The walk down that aisle lasted forever and no time at all. Jack's pace never faltered. Even when someone, she thought it might be Walter Beaumont himself, cleared his throat in disapproval. His arm under hers was steady as an oak branch, and he smelled of leather and horse and something else, cedar, maybe, or pine. They pushed through the church doors into blazing daylight. The contrast made Evelyn stumble, but Jack's grip kept her upright. On the church steps, she tried to pull away. "I thank you for your kindness, Sheriff, but—" "My name's Jack," he interrupted, "and we're not done walking yet." He guided her past the watching faces that had spilled out of the church, past the wagons and horses tied at the rail, past the millinery shop where she'd bought her veil with such hope just yesterday. They didn't stop until they reached Ma Goodwin's boarding house, a 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left, as if it too was tired of standing straight. Ma Goodwin appeared at the door before they could knock, her gray hair pinned severe and her eyes kind behind wire spectacles. "Saw the commotion from my window," she said, already stepping aside. "Come in, child. You too, Sheriff." The parlor was cool and dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Jack deposited Evelyn in a horsehair chair that had seen better decades, then stepped back, hat in his hands. "I'll be taking a room," he told Ma Goodwin. "The lady needs a place to collect herself without the whole town pressing their noses to the glass." "I can't," Evelyn started, but Jack was already pulling bills from his vest pocket. "You can and you will," he said, firm but not unkind. "Nobody deserves to be made a spectacle twice in one day." Ma Goodwin bustled off to prepare a room, leaving them alone in the parlor. Evelyn finally let her shoulders drop, the bouquet falling from nerveless fingers to the faded carpet. "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jack studied his hat brim like it held all the answers in the world. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable as slate. "I don't much care for bullies," he said simply. "Never have, never will, and a man who'd leave a woman standing at the altar, then send his brother to laugh about it?" He shook his head. "That's bullying of the worst kind." He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "You'll want to rest up. Tomorrow's a new day. Miss Carter might be surprised what it brings." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Evelyn alone with the tick of the mantel clock and the distant sound of the town continuing its life without her. She picked up the bouquet, flowers already more dead than alive, and thought about new days and surprises and sheriffs who didn't like bullies. Outside, she could hear Jack's boots on the porch boards, steady and sure as his arm had been. She closed her eyes and, for the first time since receiving that telegram, allowed herself to breathe. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows across the sheriff's office as Jack Monroe pulled open the bottom drawer of his predecessor's desk. 3 days into the job, and he was still finding surprises, mostly empty whiskey bottles and IOUs from poker games. But tonight's discovery made him sit back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. File after file, complaint after complaint, all bearing the same names: Beaumont, Thomas Beaumont, Clayton Beaumont, Walter Beaumont, and all of them shoved to the back of the drawer like secrets meant to be forgotten. Jack spread them across the desk, reading by lamplight. Margaret Sullivan's complaint about her father's sudden decision to sell their farm to the Beaumonts for half its worth. Ben Cooper's report of horses gone missing after refusing to shoe Beaumont stock on credit. And here, Jack's jaw tightened. A report filed by one Daniel Whitaker about threatening behavior from Clayton Beaumont, dated 2 months before Whitaker's accidental death in a flash flood. The knock on the door was soft, hesitant. Jack's hand moved to his Colt before he caught himself. "Come in." The woman who entered looked like she'd stepped out of a daguerreotype, pale, elegant, with dark hair swept up in a style too fancy for Dry Creek. But it was her eyes that caught Jack's attention. Lillian Beaumont had the haunted look of someone carrying secrets too heavy for her frame. "Miss Beaumont," Jack said, rising from his chair. "Bit late for a social call." "It's Mrs. Whitaker," she corrected, voice barely above a whisper. "Or it was before Daniel." She trailed off, fingers twisting a black mourning ring. Jack gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Would you like some coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "No, Thank you. I won't be long. My family doesn't know I'm here. And yet here you are. Lillian's gaze fell to the files spread across the desk. Her intake of breath was sharp, pained. You found them. Good. Sheriff Patterson was too deep in my father's pocket to do anything with them. Your father seems to have deep pockets. Deep enough to bury the truth. Her hands clenched in her lap. Sheriff Monroe, what do you know about my husband's death? Official report says flash flood. Storm came through, caught him in Willow Canyon. There was no storm that night. The words came out flat, matter of fact. I remember because I was watching the stars, waiting for Daniel to come home. Clear as glass, that sky. Jack leaned forward. You saying someone lied on an official report? I'm saying my brother Clayton came home that night with blood on his boots. Said it was from a deer he'd shot. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. Since when do you hunt deer in the dark? The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence. Outside, a dog barked, then quieted. Jack studied the woman across from him, the careful way she held herself, like someone afraid of breaking apart. Why are you telling me this now? Because of what happened today at the church. What Thomas did to that poor girl. What Clayton said. She met his eyes finally, and hers were fierce despite the tears. My brothers learned cruelty from our father, Sheriff. They perfect it on anyone who stands in their way. Daniel stood in their way. Over what? Water rights. The Whitaker Ranch controls access to Sweet Creek. Without it, the Beaumont cattle have to go 3 miles out of their way to water. Daniel wouldn't sell. She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, dabbed at her eyes. He was going to report them to the territorial authorities for harassment. Had evidence. He said, then he was dead, and I was a widow at 23. Jack picked up his pen, dipped it in ink. You willing to make an official statement? Fear flashed across her face. You don't understand. My father owns half this town, the bank, the lumber mill, controlling interest in the railroad spur. Cross him, and you don't just lose, you disappear. Like your husband. Like my husband. She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirts. I can't make a statement, not yet, but there's something. Daniel kept a journal. Letters, too. He was careful that way, always writing things down. I hid them in a cedar chest in the old barn on what used to be our property. And you're telling me this why? Lillian moved to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. Because I saw you today. You didn't know that girl. Had no reason to help her. But you did. That's not something we see much in Dry Creek. She turned back, and for a moment she looked older than her years. The barn's the one with the lightning-struck oak beside it, southeast corner of town. The chest is under the loose floorboards near the back wall. Mrs. Whitaker, they say I've gone simple with grief, that I imagine things, see threats where there are none. Father's already talking about sending me east to a rest facility. Her smile was sharp as glass. Hysteria. They call it convenient diagnosis for inconvenient women. She slipped out into the night before Jack could respond, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and the weight of accusations that could shake Dry Creek to its foundations. Jack sat back, studied the files before him. Patterson had been sheriff here for 12 years. 12 years of looking the other way, of filing complaints in bottom drawers instead of pursuing them. He stood, strapped on his gun belt. The night was young yet, and there was a barn on the southeast corner of town that needed visiting. But first, he walked to the window, gazed out at the darkened street. Somewhere out there, the Beaumont Ranch sprawled across thousands of acres, built on blood and threats and buried truths. Jack had been a lot of things in his life. Cowhand, cavalry scout, hired gun when times were lean, but he'd never been anyone's pocket sheriff. And he wasn't about to start now. Tomorrow, he'd need to check on Miss Carter, make sure she was holding up. Tonight, though, he had some digging to do. He turned down the lamp and headed for the door, then stopped. On second thought, he loaded a second cylinder for his Colt. Man couldn't be too careful when he was about to disturb the kinds of secrets that got people killed in flash floods that never happened. The moon was new, the streets dark as pitch. Good. Some work was better done without witnesses. Jack pulled his hat low and headed southeast, toward a barn with a lightning-struck oak and a cedar chest full of truth. Behind him, the sheriff's office stood empty, but the files remained spread across the desk like an accusation. Come morning, Dry Creek would wake to its usual rhythms, shops opening, cattle drives preparing. The blessed ordinary of frontier life. But underneath it all, cracks were beginning to show. Jack Monroe had been in town 3 days. Already, he was making waves. And in a place like Dry Creek, where the water was controlled by men like Walter Beaumont, waves had a way of becoming floods. The morning sun slanted through the boarding house window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. Jack Monroe set the cedar chest on Ma Goodwin's kitchen table with care, as if it contained something fragile enough to shatter. In a way, it did. Found this last night, he told Evelyn, who sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She looked better than yesterday. Color in her cheeks, steel in her spine, but shadows lingered under her eyes. Lillian Whitaker arrived minutes later, slipping through the back door like a ghost. She'd traded last night's fine dress for a simple brown calico that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Her eyes went immediately to the chest. "You found it," her voice caught. "I wasn't sure it would still be there." Jack opened the lid. The scent of cedar rose sharp and clean, mixing with the older smell of paper and ink. Inside, tied with a faded blue ribbon, were dozens of letters and a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed at the edges. "May I?" Evelyn asked, reaching for the journal. At Lillian's nod, she opened it carefully, began reading aloud. March 15th, 1871. Clayton Beaumont came by again today. 3rd time this week. Says his father's offer for the water rights is generous. I told him generous men don't send their sons to make threats. He laughed, said I didn't know what a threat was. Yet. Evelyn's voice steadied as she continued. March 22nd. Found one of my best breeding mares with her throat cut. No predator did that. The cut was too clean. Walter Beaumont expressed his condolences in town today. His smile never reached his eyes. April 3rd. They're getting bolder. Thomas Beaumont told me at the bank that accidents happen all the time in canyon country. Flash floods, he said. Rock slides. A man alone could disappear and never be found. I'm writing this down in case something happens. If it does, look to the Beaumonts. It won't be an accident. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the clock and the distant sound of Ma Goodwin humming in the parlor. Jack picked up one of the letters, unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was different. Rounder. Feminine. This one's signed R, he said. Lillian's breath hitched. Rosalind, Rosie Harper. She worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon before she left town. Left town? That's what they said. Packed up in the middle of the night. No forwarding address. Lillian's laugh was bitter. Funny how women who refuse Clayton's advances have a habit of leaving town sudden-like. Jack read the letter silently, his jaw tightening with each line. When he looked up, his eyes were hard as flint. She writes about Clayton following her home, watching her through her window. Says if something happens to her, to tell people she didn't run off. She'd never leave her sick mother alone. Her mother died 6 months after Rosie disappeared, Lillian said quietly. Died calling for a daughter who never came home. Evelyn set down the journal, her hands trembling slightly. This is evidence, real evidence. We could take this to the territorial marshal, to men who've been bought and paid for? Lillian shook her head. You don't understand how deep this goes. My father doesn't just own property, he owns people, judges, lawmen, anyone with the power to stop him. Not everyone, Jack said quietly. Not me. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Ma Goodwin's voice carried from the parlor. Sheriff, you've got visitors. Jack stood, hand moving to his gun. Stay here, both of you. But Evelyn was already rising. No, I'm done hiding. Done being the woman who waits in back rooms while men decide her fate. Before Jack could stop her, she strode into the parlor. Two men stood by the front door. Walter Beaumont himself, silver-haired and straight-backed, wearing a suit that cost more than most folks saw in a year. And beside him, Clayton, smirking like he owned the world. "Miss Carter." Walter's voice was smooth as oil. "I heard about yesterday's unfortunate incident. I've come to express my regrets about my son's behavior." "Which son?" Evelyn's chin lifted. "The one who abandoned me at the altar, or the one who laughed about it?" Clayton's smirk widened. "Can't blame a man for finding humor in the situation. You did look rather pathetic standing there." "Clayton." Walter's tone held warning, but his eyes glittered with amusement. "What I meant to say, Miss Carter, is that perhaps it would be best for everyone if you considered relocating. A fresh start. Shall we say, I'd be happy to cover your travel expenses. Say, to San Francisco? Or perhaps back east?" "How generous," Jack said from behind Evelyn. "Just like your offer to buy the Whitaker water rights?" Walter's gaze sharpened. "Sheriff Monroe, I wasn't aware you were involved in this personal matter. I'm involved in anything that concerns the law in my town, including young women being pressured to leave against their will." "No one's pressuring anyone," Walter said smoothly. "Simply offering assistance to someone who suffered an embarrassment. The talk, you understand, it would be easier for Miss Carter elsewhere. Or easier for you." Evelyn said, "Tell me, Mr. Beaumont, how many women have taken your generous offers to leave town? Was Rosie Harper one of them?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clayton's hand twitched toward his hip, where a gun would be if he were armed. Walter's face remained pleasant, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "I don't know anyone by that name," he said finally. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to. Do think about my offer. Miss Carter, these kinds of opportunities don't come along twice." They left, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Jack moved to the window, watched them climb into their polished carriage. "They know we have something. They know Lillian came here," Evelyn corrected. "They're warning us." From the kitchen doorway, Lillian stood pale but determined. "Let them warn. I'm tired of being afraid. Daniel died trying to stand up to them. The least I can do is finish what he started." Jack turned from the window. "Then we do this right. I'm sending a telegram to the territorial capital. There's a judge there, Marcus Webb. Served with him in the cavalry. If anyone's clean, it's him." "That'll take time," Evelyn said. "What do we do until then?" "We survive," Jack said grimly. "And we don't give them any excuse to make us disappear. From now on, no one goes anywhere alone. Miss Carter, you'll stay here at the boarding house. Mrs. Whitaker, you need to go home. Act normal. Can you do that?" Lillian nodded. "I've been acting normal since Daniel died. I can manage a few more days." "And the evidence?" Evelyn asked. Jack gathered the letters and journal, placed them back in the chest. "This stays with me. Anyone wants it, they'll have to go through me to get it." After Lillian left through the back door, Evelyn and Jack stood in the parlor, the weight of what they'd uncovered settling over them like a heavy blanket. "You could have stayed out of this," Evelyn said quietly. "Could have taken their money, looked the other way like Sheriff Patterson." Jack's smile was tired but genuine. "Could have, but then I'd have to look at myself in the mirror every morning. Some things are worth more than money or an easy life." "What's worth risking your life for a town that's not even yours? For people you barely know?" He was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the street where life continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the storm building. Maybe it's not about the town. Maybe it's about proving that someone, somewhere, will stand up and say no more. Maybe it's about showing folks that bullies don't always win. He looked at her then, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits. Or maybe it's about making sure no one else has to stand alone at an altar, wondering if they're worth fighting for. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows. In a few hours, Jack would send that telegram. The wheels of justice would begin to turn, slow but inexorable. But for now, in Ma Goodwin's parlor, two people stood together, no longer strangers, preparing for a fight that would determine not just their own fates, but the soul of Dry Creek itself. The church bells rang out across Dry Creek, but this time they called people to witness, not to celebrate. Word had spread like wildfire through the dusty streets. There would be testimonies given, truths told, accounts settled, not in the name of any particular soul, the hastily written notices said, but in the name of justice itself. The pews filled slowly at first. Men clustered near the doors, ready to leave if things turned uncomfortable. Women whispered behind gloved hands, darting glances at the front where Evelyn Carter sat straight-backed and steady. The Beaumont pew remained conspicuously empty. Reverend Morrison looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. His hands shook as he opened his Bible, then closed it again. "We're not here for a service," he said finally. "We're here because silence has become a sin in itself." Evelyn rose first. She'd traded her wedding dress for a simple gray cotton, her hair pulled back severe, but there was nothing simple about the way she held herself as she faced the congregation. 3 days ago, I stood here in white, waiting for a man who'd promised to honor me. Her voice carried clear to the back pews. "But this isn't about a broken engagement. It's about the 100 small cruelties that led to that moment. The way Thomas Beaumont would grip my arm too tight in public, then smile when people looked. The way he'd tell me I was lucky he'd chosen me. Damaged goods that I was. My father dead. Our ranch struggling." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been loudest in her whispers 3 days prior, studied her hymnal with sudden intensity. "The way he'd say things," Evelyn continued. "Small things, cutting things. That my opinions were charming but unnecessary. That I should be grateful he was willing to overlook my provincial upbringing. That once we were married, he'd teach me proper behavior." "Miss Carter." Walter Beaumont's voice cut through from the back of the church. He'd entered silent as a snake, Clayton flanking him. "These are serious accusations to make against a man who isn't here to defend himself." "Then where is he?" Evelyn turned to face him. "Where's Thomas, Mr. Beaumont? Still in San Francisco on that urgent business?" Jack Monroe stepped out from the side door, star glinting on his chest. "Mr. Beaumont, you're welcome to stay and listen, but any interruptions and I'll have to ask you to leave. This is a church, not a courthouse," Walter said coldly. "No, it's a place of truth." Reverend Morrison found his voice, and we've been lacking that for too long. Lillian Whitaker rose next, her mourning dress a stark reminder. The congregation held its breath. A Beaumont speaking against Beaumonts was unheard of. "My name is Lillian Beaumont Whitaker," she began, voice thin but determined. "And I've been silent too long. Silent when my husband came home worried about threats. Silent when he died in a canyon that was dry as bones. Silent when my own family told me grief was making me imagine things." She turned to look directly at her father and brother. "But I'm not imagining the blood on Clayton's boots that night. I'm not imagining the way you celebrated when the water rights transferred to our family. I'm not imagining the fear in this town, thick as the dust in summer. You're ill." "Lillian," Walter said, his voice carrying a warning. "This hysteria is what you call any woman who speaks uncomfortable truths." Grace Holloway interrupted, standing from her seat in the middle pews. The seamstress was a small woman, barely 5 feet, but her voice rang clear. "Just like you called me hysterical when I complained about Clayton forcing his attentions on me. When I said no, suddenly my rent at the shop doubled. When I kept saying no, the bank called in my loan early. I lost my shop," Grace continued, tears streaming down her face. "Had to take in washing to survive, all because I wouldn't accommodate your son." The dam broke then. Sarah Morrison, the Reverend's own daughter, stood next, then Annie Sullivan, who ran the schoolhouse, Martha Chen, whose husband operated the laundry. One by one, women rose to speak their truths, about threats and pressure, about businesses ruined and reputations destroyed, about a system that protected the powerful and crushed anyone who resisted. "This is a witch hunt," Clayton snarled, but even his allies were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. An elderly woman in the back row stood slowly, leaning heavily on a cane. Agnes Harper, Rosie's mother, had barely left her house since her daughter disappeared. "My Rosie was a good girl," she said, voice cracking with age and grief. "Worked honest at the saloon, saving money to get us somewhere better. Then Clayton Beaumont took a liking to her. She tried to be polite, tried to discourage him gentle-like, but he wouldn't take no for an answer." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket with trembling hands. "She gave me this the night she disappeared. Said if anything happened, to give it to someone who'd listen. Nobody would listen then. Maybe they'll listen now." Jack took the letter, read it aloud. Rosie's words were simple, direct, terrifying in their clarity. She documented Clayton's escalating behavior, following her home, leaving threatening notes, telling her she could either be his woman or no man's woman at all. "The last line," Jack said, his voice rough, reads, "If I disappear, know that I didn't run. I'd never leave Mama. Look for me in the canyon where the Beaumonts bury their problems." The church erupted. Men who'd been silent found their voices, remembering other disappearances, other threats. The banker, Harold Stanton, stood abruptly and left, but not before catching Jack's eye and nodding slightly. Through it all, a woman in a severe black traveling suit sat in the front row, taking notes in shorthand. She'd arrived on the morning stage, presenting credentials that identified her as Rochelle Langston, Territorial Investigation Bureau. Her presence had gone unnoticed in the emotion of the testimonies. But Jack had seen her, had exchanged a meaningful glance. "Enough," Walter Beaumont's voice boomed out. "This is slander, pure and simple. You have no proof of any of this. Just the ravings of hysterical women and a sheriff who's been here less than a week." "We have Daniel Whitaker's journal," Jack said calmly. "We have letters. We have a pattern of behavior going back years. And now we have a church full of witnesses." "Witnesses to what? Hurt feelings, business deals gone bad?" But Walter's confidence was cracking. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the town to find its spine. Evelyn stood again. "We're not asking for vigilante justice, Mr. Beaumont. We're asking for the law to do what it should have done years ago. Investigate, question, hold people accountable. And if you're innocent," Lillian added, looking at her father with a mixture of sorrow and determination, "then you have nothing to fear from the truth." The Beaumonts left then, Walter's back rigid, Clayton's face promising retribution. But they left alone. Not one of their usual supporters followed them out. Reverend Morrison closed with a prayer, not for vengeance, but for courage, for truth, for a community learning to stand together instead of cowering apart. As people filed out, they did something that hadn't happened in years. They looked each other in the eye. They spoke in normal voices instead of whispers. The women who'd testified found themselves surrounded by support instead of shunned. Rochelle Langston approached Jack and Evelyn as the church emptied. "Sheriff Monroe, Miss Carter, that was quite a display. I'll need to interview each witness formally, of course, but I believe we have enough to open a full investigation." "How long?" Evelyn asked. "These things take time, but with what I've heard today." She smiled grimly. "The Beaumont Empire is built on sand, and the tide just turned." Outside, the sun was setting, painting Dry Creek in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in memory, the town felt different. Not just quiet or cleaner somehow, as if speaking truth had washed away years of accumulated grime. Jack walked Evelyn back to the boarding house, both lost in thought. At the door, she turned to him. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," he said, "and we watch. The Beaumonts won't go down without a fight." "Are you ready for that?" He smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "Miss Carter, I've been ready for this fight my whole life. Just took me a while to find the right battlefield." As he tipped his hat and headed back to his office, Evelyn realized something had shifted between them too. In standing together against injustice, they'd forged something stronger than mere acquaintance. Not love, not yet, but the foundation for it: trust, respect, and the shared understanding that some fights were worth having, no matter the cost. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and for the first time in years, Dry Creek slept a little easier. The hallway of Ma Goodwin's boarding house stretched dark and narrow, smelling of lemon oil and the lingering ghost of that evening's beef stew. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Hadn't been able to since the church testimonies 2 days prior. She'd taken to walking the halls at night, finding comfort in the creak of old wood under her feet. The sound came soft at first, the careful turn of the back door handle, the whisper of boots on boards meant to go unheard. Evelyn froze, pressing herself against the wall. Moonlight through the window at the hall's end threw long shadows, and in those shadows, she saw him. Clayton Beaumont moved like a man who'd done this before, who knew which boards creaked and which stayed silent. The smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves, mixing with something sharper. Desperation, maybe, or rage fermented past reason. His right hand stayed buried in his coat pocket, wrapped around something that caught the light when he shifted. A folding knife, pearl-handled and well-used. Evelyn's heart hammered so loud she was sure he'd hear it. Her room was 3 doors down, but to reach it, she'd have to pass him. The back stairs were closer, leading up to where Jack stayed when he wasn't at his office. But the first step groaned like a dying man. Everyone in the house knew to skip it. Clayton paused at Lillian's door. His sister had been staying here since the testimonies, too afraid to go home to the ranch. His free hand reached for the doorknob, turned it slow, locked. A growl rumbled from his throat. "Lillian," he whispered, voice thick. "Open up. Time to come home. Father says you've embarrassed us enough." No answer from behind the door. Clayton's grip on the knife tightened, knuckles white in the moonlight. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he continued, words slurring together. "You're sick, remember? Hysterical. Need looking after. Father's already got the papers drawn up. Nice place back east where they can fix what's wrong with you." Evelyn held her breath, mind racing. The window at the end of the hall. Could she reach it, make enough noise to wake someone? But then Clayton shifted, and she saw his face in profile. His eyes weren't just drunk. They were wild, unfocused, the eyes of a man who'd crossed some internal line and couldn't find his way back. "You ruined everything," Clayton muttered, no longer talking to the door but to himself. "Thomas gone, Father looking at me like I'm something scraped off his boot, all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, just like Rosie, just like Daniel." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's hand found the wall behind her, fingers searching for anything, a vase, a picture frame, something to use as a weapon. Nothing but smooth wallpaper and her own terror. Then, clear as a bell in the darkness, the click of a hammer being cocked. "Step away from the door. Clayton!" Jack's voice came from the top of the stairs, steady as bedrock. He descended slowly, his Colt trained on Clayton's center mass. He'd appeared silent as a ghost, barefoot, suspenders hanging loose over his undershirt. But his gun hand didn't waver. Clayton turned, that pearl-handled knife sliding free of his pocket. "Sheriff, should have figured you'd be sniffing around here, playing protector to all the poor, helpless women. Drop the knife. Or what? You'll shoot an unarmed man. My father owns the judge. Remember? You pull that trigger, you'll hang for murder." "Maybe," Jack said, taking another step down. "But you'll still be dead. That worth it to you?" The two men faced each other in the narrow hallway. Violence coiled between them like a living thing. Evelyn could see the calculation in Clayton's eyes. Distance to Jack. Distance to her. Which target would hurt more? "I'm not going to prison," Clayton said finally. "Not for Daniel, not for Rosie, not for any of them. They got what they deserved. What happens to people who don't know their place?" "Is that a confession?" Clayton's laugh was ugly. "Why not? You think it matters? You think your little investigation matters? We own this territory. Have for 20 years. Some stranger sheriff and a jilted bride aren't going to change that." Movement at the other end of the hall. Lillian's door opened a crack, and Evelyn saw the glint of a derringer in her hand. Ma Goodwin appeared from her room, oil lamp in one hand, her late husband's shotgun in the other. The boarding house was awake, alert, ready. Clayton saw it too. Saw his chances narrowing to nothing. The knife trembled in his grip. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might lunge anyway, might choose blood over surrender. "You're done, Clayton," Jack said quietly. "It's over. Your father's empire, your immunity, all of it. That investigator from the territory? She's got signed testimonies from half the town. The federal marshal's already on his way. Now drop the knife and put your hands behind your head." The knife clattered to the floor. Clayton's shoulders sagged, all the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Jack descended the rest of the stairs, kicked the knife away, produced shackles from somewhere. "Clayton Beaumont, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, threatening behavior, and suspicion of murder in the deaths of Daniel Whitaker and Rosalind Harper." As the metal clicked around Clayton's wrists, he looked at Evelyn for the first time. "You," he said, voice full of poison. "This is all your fault, if you just disappeared like you were supposed to." "But I didn't," Evelyn said, finding her voice at last. "None of us did. We stayed, and we spoke up, and we found each other. That's what you never understood. Clayton, you thought fear made people weak, but sometimes it just makes them angry enough to fight back." Jack marched Clayton out, but not before catching Evelyn's eye. Something passed between them. Not romance, not in that moment of violence barely averted, but something deeper. Partnership, trust. The knowledge that when the critical moment came, they'd both chosen to stand rather than run. Lillian emerged fully from her room, the derringer still shaking in her grip. "Is it really over?" "No," Ma Goodwin said, setting down her shotgun with practiced ease. "But it's beginning to be over. That's something." The women gathered in the hallway, drawn together by shared danger and shared relief. Outside, they could hear Jack loading Clayton into a wagon, could hear Clayton's slurred threats and promises of retribution. "His father will come," Lillian said quietly. "Walter Beaumont doesn't accept defeat. Then we'll be ready." Evelyn replied, "All of us." Dawn was breaking by the time statements were given and Clayton was secured in the jail. Jack returned to find the women in Ma Goodwin's kitchen, coffee brewing strong enough to float a horseshoe. "Judge Forrester's been roused from bed," he reported. "He's not happy, but with Miss Langston breathing down his neck, he's playing it straight. Set bail high enough that even Walter Beaumont will have to liquidate assets to pay it." "What about a confession?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing formal yet, but what he said in that hallway, with 4 witnesses." Jack accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. "It's enough to dig deeper. Search teams are already forming to check the canyon." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, each lost in their own thoughts. The night had changed things, shifted the balance of power in ways that couldn't be undone. Clayton Beaumont, who terrorized Dry Creek for years, sat in a cell. His victims had found their voices, and the law, for perhaps the first time in decades, was on the side of justice. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally, looking at Jack. "For being there, for being ready." Jack's smile was tired but genuine. "That's what partners do. Miss Carter, they watch each other's backs. Partners." The word hung between them, full of possibility. Not quite a declaration, but close enough. In the morning light streaming through Ma Goodwin's kitchen window, it felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like the beginning of something worth building, worth protecting, worth staying for. Outside, Dry Creek was waking up to a new day and a new reality. The Beaumont Empire had cracked, and through those cracks, light was finally beginning to shine. The courthouse steps were crowded with townspeople when Judge Forrester emerged, his face gray as old dishwater. Behind him, Rochelle Langston stood straight-backed and satisfied, federal documents tucked under her arm. The news spread through the crowd like wildfire. Judge Forrester had resigned, effective immediately. Years of taking Beaumont money had finally caught up with him. "The territorial court will be sending a replacement within the week," Miss Langston announced to the gathered crowd. "In the meantime, All of Walter Beaumont's assets are frozen pending investigation. That includes the bank, the mill, and all ranch operations. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others looked worried. The Beaumont holdings employed half the town. What would happen to their jobs, their loans, their futures? Jack stood on the edge of the crowd, watching Walter Beaumont's face as his empire crumbled in real time. The patriarch stood rigid, his expensive suit suddenly looking like costume rather than power. But it was his eyes that caught Jack's attention. Not defeated. Not yet. Calculating. "This isn't over," Walter said, loud enough to carry. "You think you've won something here? This town needs me. Without Beaumont money, Dry Creek dries up and blows away. We'll manage." Someone called from the crowd. Harold Stanton, the banker who'd found his courage. "Town got along before you came. It'll get along after you're gone." The crowd began to disperse, but Jack noticed something that made his lawman's instincts prickle. Clayton's horse was gone from the jail's hitching post. He'd made bail just an hour ago, put up by his father liquidating what assets he could access. Jack had argued against it, but with Forrester's replacement not yet arrived, the temporary magistrate had followed the letter of the law. "Where's Clayton?" Jack asked Walter directly. The older man's smile was thin as paper. "My son is resting at the ranch, house arrest, as specified by the bail terms." But Jack had seen that look before, in the eyes of cornered animals that would chew off their own leg to escape a trap. He found Evelyn in the crowd, pulled her aside. "Something's wrong. Clayton's horse is gone, and Walter's too calm." Evelyn's eyes widened. "The hunting cabin. Lillian mentioned it once, up in the cedar forests. Clayton goes there when he needs to. Get away." They found Lillian at the boarding house, packing her few belongings. She was moving to her late husband's sister's house on the other side of town, refusing to return to the Beaumont ranch. "The cabin?" She paled at Jack's question. "It's 8 miles up the mountain trail. Old trapper's place Clayton fixed up. He keeps—" She paused, swallowed hard. "He keeps things there. Trophies, he calls them." Jack's jaw tightened. "I need to go." "Not alone," Evelyn said immediately. "This isn't what? Dangerous? More dangerous than him breaking into the boarding house?" Evelyn's chin lifted in that way Jack was beginning to recognize. "I'm going. You can either take me with you or follow my dust." An hour later, they rode up the mountain trail, the trees closing in around them like green walls. Jack had tried once more to convince Evelyn to stay behind, but she'd simply saddled her mare. Turned out she'd been raised on horseback. Another surprise, and waited for him to stop arguing. The forest grew denser as they climbed, cedars towering overhead, their scent thick in the afternoon air. The trail showed fresh hoof prints, headed up. One horse, riding hard. "He's running," Jack said quietly. "Probably figures to hide out until the heat dies down, then slip across the territorial border, or until his father buys his way out of trouble again. Not this time. Miss Langston's got federal backing. The Beaumont protection is done." They heard the cabin before they saw it, or rather, they heard Clayton's voice, carrying through the trees. He was talking to someone. Words slurred with drink or madness or both. Should have listened. He was saying, "Told you what happens to people who don't know their place, but you had to push, had to threaten to go to the law." Jack dismounted silently, helped Evelyn down. Through the trees, they could see the cabin rough-hewn logs, small windows, smoke rising from the chimney despite the warm day. Clayton's horse stood tied outside, lathered with sweat. They crept closer, and through the window, Evelyn saw what made her stomach turn. Clayton sat in a chair, drinking from a bottle, talking to trophies, items mounted on the walls like a hunter's prizes. A woman's comb, a man's pocket watch, a yellow hair ribbon that might have belonged to Rosie Harper. Kept them all, Clayton muttered. Proof of lessons taught, but now they want to dig them up. Want to make me pay. Well, I paid, didn't I? Paid with Thomas running off. Paid with Father looking at me like I'm nothing. Jack had seen enough. He stepped onto the cabin's narrow porch, hand on his gun. Clayton Beaumont, come on out. Time to go back. The voice inside stopped. Then, a laugh. High and wild. Sheriff Monroe. Should have known you'd follow. You're like a dog with a bone. It's over. Clayton, come out peaceful, and we'll ride back together. Peaceful? The door swung open, and Clayton stood there, weaving slightly. In one hand, the whiskey bottle. In the other, an old army revolver. Nothing peaceful about any of this. You took everything, my future, my family's name, everything. You took that yourself, Evelyn said, stepping into view. Every choice you made, every person you hurt, that was you. Clayton's eyes focused on her with difficulty. The bride, the start of it all, if you just left town like a good girl. Put the gun down, Jack said, voice steady. You're drunk and not thinking straight. Oh, I'm thinking clear for the first time in years. Clayton raised the revolver, but not at them. He pressed it to his own temple, finger on the trigger. You want me to pay? Want me to suffer? How's this for suffering? Clayton, no! Evelyn stepped forward instinctively. Don't, Jack warned, but she was already moving, already speaking. This isn't the way, she said, voice low and urgent. You think this makes you strong? It makes you a coward, just like running from the altar was cowardice, just like hurting people who couldn't fight back was cowardice. Clayton's hand shook. Shut up. You want to die as you lived? Remembered as nothing but a bully who couldn't face consequences. Evelyn took another step. Or do you want to finally do one thing, just one thing, that takes real courage? What would you know about courage? I know it takes courage to admit you're wrong, to face what you've done, to try to make amends, even if it's impossible. She was close enough now to see the tears mixing with sweat on his face. I know because I had to find that courage when Thomas left. Had to decide whether to run and hide or stand and face the shame. The gun wavered, lowered an inch. You'll rot in prison, Clayton said, but the fight was leaving his voice. Maybe, but you'll do it as a man who finally chose to face the truth instead of running from it. The moment stretched taut as wire. Jack's hand hovered over his own weapon. Ready. The forest held its breath. Then Clayton's arm dropped. The gun fell from nerveless fingers, thudding on the wooden floor. He collapsed back into the doorframe, all the poisonous energy draining out of him like pus from a lanced wound. I killed them, he said, voice barely a whisper. Daniel because he wouldn't sell. Rosie because she wouldn't. Wouldn't be mine. Others too. Father said it was business. But I liked it, liked the power. Jack moved fast, kicking the gun away, getting Clayton in irons while he was still talking. The confession poured out like water through a broken dam names. Dates, locations. Where to find Daniel's body. Where Rosie was buried. Others they hadn't even known were missing. As they loaded Clayton onto his horse for the ride back, he looked at Evelyn one last time. You're wrong, you know, about courage. I'm not brave. I'm just tired. Being tired of running is its own kind of courage, she replied. They rode back as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of justice and sorrow. Clayton slumped in his saddle, finally looking like what he was. Not a monster, but a broken man who'd chosen monstrosity until it consumed him. At the jail, Miss Langston waited with a stenographer. Clayton repeated his confession, signed it, then curled into the corner of his cell like a child. Walter Beaumont arrived as they were leaving. His face aged a decade in a day. My son, was all he said. And for the first time, he sounded like a father instead of a patriarch. Outside, Jack and Evelyn stood in the cooling night air, processing what had happened. You saved his life, Jack said quietly. Maybe saved his soul, if he has one left. Everyone has a soul, Evelyn replied. Some just bury it so deep they forget where they put it. Jack studied her face in the lamplight. This woman who'd been abandoned at the altar just days ago, who'd found the strength not just to stand but to show mercy to her tormentor. You're quite something. Evelyn Carter. She smiled, tired but genuine. So are you, Jack Monroe. They stood there a moment longer, partners in something larger than themselves. Tomorrow would bring trials and revelations, the slow work of rebuilding a town's faith in justice. But tonight, they'd prevented one more tragedy, pulled one more truth into the light. It was enough, more than enough. It was a beginning. The cedar forest was thick with morning mist when Evelyn guided her mare up the narrow trail. She'd left before dawn, telling no one, carrying only her father's old pistol and a determination to end this properly. The tracks in the mud told her she was right. Someone had ridden this way recently, heading for the old hunting cabin. Behind her, she heard hoofbeats. Jack appeared through the mist like a specter, his face a mix of exasperation and concern. "You were supposed to wait," he said, pulling alongside her. "You were supposed to trust me." She kept her eyes on the trail. Clayton's confession isn't enough, not while there are still secrets buried in these woods. They'd released Clayton to his father's custody that morning, house arrest, while awaiting trial. But something in Walter Beaumont's eyes had worried Evelyn. The old man had accepted his empire's fall too easily, had looked at his broken son with calculation rather than compassion. "You think Walter's cleaning house?" Jack said. It wasn't a question. "I think a man who built his fortune on buried bodies knows how to bury a few more." The cabin materialized through the trees, but this time, smoke didn't rise from the chimney. The door stood ajar, creaking in the wind. Jack dismounted first, gun drawn, but Evelyn was right behind him. Inside, they found chaos. The trophies Clayton had collected were gone, the walls bare except for pale rectangles where they'd hung. The floorboards near the fireplace had been pried up, revealing an empty hiding space. "He beat us here," Jack muttered. A sound from outside, horses approaching fast. They moved to the window, saw Walter Beaumont climbing down from his carriage, 2 hired men flanking him. In his hands, a leather satchel that bulged with weight. "Stay inside," Jack whispered, but Evelyn was already heading for the door. She stepped onto the porch, hands visible but near her holstered pistol. "Mr. Beaumont, early morning for a ride." Walter's face showed no surprise. If anything, he looked resigned. "Miss Carter, I should have known you'd interfere. You've been nothing but trouble since my son chose you. Your son chose to abandon me. Everything that followed was his choice. And yours." "Choice," Walter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think we choose to be what we are? The frontier makes us, shapes us, the weak die, the strong take what they can. That's where you're wrong." Jack emerged from the cabin, star glinting on his chest. "The frontier doesn't make monsters, it just reveals them." Walter's hired men tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. "I came to burn it," Walter said finally. "All of it, the evidence, the souvenirs my son collected, one last fire to cauterize the wound. Those souvenirs belong to families." Evelyn said, "People who need to know what happened to their loved ones. What good does knowing do? Will it bring them back? Will it undo what's done?" Walter's composure cracked. "My son is destroyed. My life's work is in ruins. At least let the dead stay buried." "The dead don't stay buried," a new voice said. "They haunt us until we face them." Lillian Whitaker stepped out from the trees, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, a small group of townspeople emerged. Agnes Harper, Grace Holloway, families of the missing. They'd followed too, drawn by the same need for closure. "Sister," Walter said, and for the first time, he looked old. "You brought them here?" "I brought myself here. They came on their own." Lillian's voice was steady. "It's time, Father. Time to stop protecting Clayton. Time to stop protecting yourself. He's my son. He's a killer, and you made him one by teaching him that power means never facing consequences." Tears ran down Lillian's face. "I loved Daniel, loved him more than your approval, more than the family name. And you let Clayton kill him because water rights mattered more than my happiness." The satchel in Walter's hands grew heavy. Slowly, like a man in a dream, he set it on the ground. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the missing trophies. Each one labeled with a name, A date. Evidence of crimes stretching back years. He kept records, Walters said. Voice hollow. Names, places, how they died. Like he was proud. He looked at Jack. It's all there. Everything you need to put him away forever. And you? Jack asked. You knew. All these years. You knew. Walter straightened, finding some ghost of his old authority. I built this town, fed it, employed it, made it matter. Yes, I knew. I told myself it was the cost of progress, that civilization required. He stopped, shook his head. But I was just a coward hiding behind fancy words. The sun broke through the trees then, burning away the mist. In the clear morning light, everyone looked exposed, raw. The families of the victims moved forward, reaching for the tokens of their lost ones. Agnes Harper cradled Rosie's hair ribbon like it was spun gold. There's one more thing, Walters said. He walked to the cabin's corner, kicked at a pile of old cedar shingles. Beneath them, a wooden cross, weathered but intact. Daniel Whitaker's buried here, Clayton. He thought it was fitting, burying him at the place where he liked to celebrate his conquests. Lillian made a sound like a wounded animal. Evelyn caught her as she swayed, held her as she sobbed. Around them, the forest seemed to exhale, releasing secrets held too long. Walter Beaumont, Jack said formally. You're under arrest for accessory after the fact, conspiracy to conceal evidence, and whatever else the territorial prosecutor can make stick. Walter nodded like he'd expected it. As Jack shackled him, he looked at Evelyn. You asked my son to show courage, to face his truth. Well, here's mine. I created a monster because I was too proud to admit my methods were monstrous. Lock me up, Sheriff. Maybe it'll help me sleep. The procession back to town was strange. Victims, families, and perpetrator riding together, united in exhaustion and a need for ending. Clayton waited at the jail, his father's arrival breaking whatever denial he'd clung to. When he saw the families carrying their tokens, he crumbled completely. By noon, both Beaumont men sat in cells, their statements recorded, their empire dismantled. The federal prosecutor Miss Langston brought was thorough, methodical. There would be trials, but the outcome was certain. Evelyn stood outside the jail, suddenly drained. The thing she'd driven toward was done. The truth was revealed. Justice grinding forward. But what now? You did it, Jack said, joining her. You refused to let them bury it again. We did it, she corrected. All of us who refused to stay silent. They stood together in the afternoon sun, watching Dry Creek continue its life. Businesses opening, people talking freely, the shadow of the Beaumont name already beginning to fade. That was brave, Jack said quietly. Riding up there alone, facing him down. I wasn't alone. Evelyn replied, even when I left early, I knew you'd follow. That's what partners do. The word hung between them again, heavier now with meaning. In the past week, they'd moved from strangers to allies to something more, something built on mutual respect and shared purpose. What will you do now? Jack asked. With Thomas gone, the ranch. I'll manage it myself. My father taught me well. She smiled. Might even make a success of it, without Beaumont pressure driving us under. Need any help? I know a bit about cattle. When I'm not sheriffing. She looked at him then. Really looked. This man who'd lifted her veil of shame, who'd stood by her through violence and revelation, who'd never once suggested she was too weak or too female for the fight. I might, she said. Partners split the work, after all. He smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. That they do, Miss Carter, that they do. As the sun headed toward the horizon, they walked together down Main Street, not touching, not yet, but side by side, step matching step, behind them. The jail held the men who'd terrorized Dry Creek. Ahead, the town spread out full of possibility. Justice had come to the frontier, carried not by guns or violence, but by voices refusing to be silenced. And in that justice, something else had bloomed. A connection between two people who'd found in each other the courage to stand tall. The cedar forests kept their remaining secrets. But the important ones had been brought to light. The dead could rest. The living could heal. And perhaps, in time, even love could grow in soil no longer poisoned by fear. A month had passed since the arrests, and Dry Creek looked different in the morning light. The old Beaumont Bank building now housed a cooperative venture, run by a board of local business owners. Where the family's grand sign once hung, a simple painted board read, Dry Creek Community Bank, owned by those who build it. Evelyn stood in front of what used to be Beaumont's general store, now transformed into Carter's Books and Sundries. She'd claimed the building in settlement of debts the Beaumonts owed her father's estate, debts that had mysteriously come to light during the federal investigation. Through the clean glass windows, shelves of books caught the morning sun. "Never figured you for a shopkeeper," Jack said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe next door. "Never figured myself for a lot of things." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "But books, they're different. They're escape and education and hope all bound in leather." On the door, she'd hung a small framed excerpt from one of Rosie Harper's letters. "Every person deserves their story told true." It had become something of a town motto. Inside, Grace Holloway was arranging fabric samples in the corner Evelyn had given her for a small dressmaking section. The seamstress had her shop back, but she'd chosen to share space here. "Strength in numbers," she'd said, and meant it. "Federal marshals took the Beaumont men yesterday," Jack reported. "Trial's set for next month in the territorial capital. Miss Langston says it's as clear-cut as they come." Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Through the window, she watched Agnes Harper shuffle past. No longer alone, neighbors walked with her now, checked on her, included her. The town had learned something about looking after its own. "Any word from Thomas?" Jack asked carefully. "A letter from San Francisco." Evelyn's smile was wry, wanting to reconcile now that his family's fortune is gone. "Apparently, I'm more appealing without the Beaumont shadow. And I sent it back unopened. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way." The morning bustle increased as more shops opened. Harold Stanton emerged from the bank, nodding respectfully to them both. He'd proven surprisingly adept at managing the cooperative, possibly because he finally could make decisions based on merit rather than fear. "The ranch?" Jack inquired. "Running well. The hands respect someone who knows the work." She paused. "Though I could use a partner, someone who knows cattle and isn't afraid of hard work." "That's so." Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Anyone in mind?" "Oh, I might have someone. Tall fellow, wears a star. Seems to have a habit of showing up when needed." They stood close now, the proper distance of a month ago forgotten. The town had watched their partnership evolve with interest but respect. After all they'd been through together, no one questioned their right to find happiness. "Evelyn," Jack said, setting down his coffee, "I've been thinking." "Sheriff, Miss Carter." Young Timothy Chen came running, his father's laundry delivery forgotten. "There's a lady at the stage depot. Says she's here for a wedding, but ain't nobody getting married that I heard of." Jack and Evelyn exchanged glances. They found the woman, elderly, well-dressed, clearly confused, sitting on her trunk at the depot. "I'm here for the Beaumont Carter wedding," she announced. "Thomas is my nephew, sent me an invitation months ago, though this town looks different than he described." Evelyn felt the old shame try to rise, but it couldn't find purchase anymore. "Ma'am, I'm Evelyn Carter. I'm afraid there was no wedding." Thomas changed his mind. The woman's face fell, then hardened. "That boy, just like his father, making promises he won't keep." She looked at Evelyn with sharp eyes. "You're better off, my dear. The Beaumont men are handsome devils, but they've got ice where their hearts should be. I've learned that," Evelyn said gently. "Can we help you arrange return passage?" As they sorted out the confusion, Evelyn caught Jack watching her with something like pride. She'd faced her past without flinching, had treated the old woman with kindness despite the reminder of her humiliation. Later, at the boarding house where they'd convinced Thomas's aunt to rest before the evening stage, Ma Goodwin pulled Evelyn aside. That was well done. Year ago, you'd have hidden from her. Year ago, I thought shame was something others put on you. Evelyn replied, Now I know it's something you choose to carry or set down. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jack appeared at the bookshop as Evelyn was closing up. He held a package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Open it. Inside was a first edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the binding worn but solid. For the shop's collection, he said, or for you. Figured a place built on truth should have some poetry in it. Jack. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover. It's perfect. There's something else. He pulled out a smaller item, a simple silver ring. Nothing fancy, just a band that caught the light. I know it's only been a month. No folks might talk, but Evelyn, I've watched you rebuild yourself and help rebuild this town. You're the strongest person I know, and I'd be honored if you'd consider— Yes. He blinked. I hadn't finished. Did you need to? She smiled, and it was like sunrise. Yes, Jack Monroe. To whatever you're asking. Partnership in the ranch, the shop, in life. Yes, to all of it. He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit like it was meant to be there. They kissed then, soft and sure, tasting of coffee and promises and new beginnings. Outside, Dry Creek went about its evening routines. The saloon's piano started up, a cheerful tune now, not the mournful dirges of the Beaumont era. Families headed home for supper. The federal office that had replaced the old sheriff's station closed for the night, its work of justice continuing but no longer urgent. When? Evelyn asked against Jack's shoulder. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I'm not going anywhere. The church? They both looked through the window toward the steeple rising against the darkening sky, the same church where she'd been abandoned, where the town had found its voice. If you want, though I'd marry you in a barn or a field, or right here among your books. The church, she decided. But different this time. Our way. Small. Just the people who matter. And I'll walk myself down that aisle. I'd expect nothing less. They closed up the shop together, working in comfortable rhythm. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, arm in arm, folks nodded and smiled. There was rightness to it. This pairing born of crisis but built on respect, at the boarding house. Lillian Whitaker sat on the porch with Ma Goodwin, both women knitting in the evening cool. About time, Lillian called out, spotting the ring. We were starting to wonder if you two would ever stop dancing around it. Good things take time, Jack replied, tipping his hat. As they climbed the steps, Evelyn paused, looking back at the town spread before them. A month ago, she'd stood in this same spot, shamed and abandoned. Now she stood claimed and claiming, partner to a good man, owner of her own business, friend to women who'd found their courage alongside her. No regrets? Jack asked, reading her thoughts. None. If Thomas hadn't left me at that altar, none of this would have happened. The truth would have stayed buried. The town would have stayed afraid. She turned to him. And I'd never have known what real partnership looks like. Inside, Ma Goodwin had supper waiting and questions about wedding plans. Grace Holloway appeared with fabric samples for a dress. Harold Stanton's wife brought cake designs, the evening filled with laughter and planning and the sweet ordinariness of a community healing itself. As the night deepened, Jack walked Evelyn to her room, propriety still mattering, even for engaged folks. At her door, he kissed her once more, soft and full of promise. Thank you, she said against his lips. For what? For lifting my veil when I couldn't lift it myself, for seeing who I could be, not just who I was. Evelyn, he said, cupping her face gently. You lifted your own veil. I just offered my arm for the walk. After he left, Evelyn stood by her window, looking out at Dry Creek sleeping peaceful under the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a business, planning a wedding, building a life with Jack. But tonight, she felt only gratitude. The veil of shame that had threatened to suffocate her was gone, replaced by clear sight and clear purpose. The town that had whispered behind her back now stood with her. The man who'd been a stranger had become her choice, her future. She pulled the curtains closed on the past and turned toward tomorrow. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and another answered. Even the wild things knew the value of partnership, of voices raised together against the dark. Dry Creek slept on, a town transformed by truth and courage and the radical act of refusing to be silenced. And in her small room, Evelyn Carter, soon to be Evelyn Monroe, smiled as she drifted off to sleep. No longer alone, no longer ashamed, finally and fully free. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps create more stories of courage, justice, and love in the American frontier.